there are three sides to every single story, and I think that's what people are probably going to walk away from this. Eric came to the conclusion after this raw and equipped powerlifting conversation that he indeed needs to get up to 120 kilos, a svelte 120 kilos, and compete in gear. And I walked away honestly more determined than ever to boycott powerlifting in general until they reinstate the bicep curl as the premier strength lift.
So you're not comfortable with it simply just being in some meets and ran by some powerlifting federations or being a strict curl.
Yeah.
You're saying when people say the big three, it either needs to become the big four, and the first one is the squat, or maybe they say there's the big one and then the medium three afterwards.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I think that's fair. Yeah, no, we both come away with a lot. You know the saying that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I think you've chosen a worthy cause. Strict curl is the primary lift.
Yeah.
And likewise, I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get to a svelte 120.
Yeah.
Considering I'm a less than svelte 95, 96 right now. But I think with enough hard work, determination, and no longer competing in drug-tested events, I think I can get there.
I just want to say I believe in you, and really believing is achieving, and that's why we have some fantastic guests, and we have two people back for their second time today to talk about equipped lifting, which some people from the outset, they might think to themselves, wait, what? Equipped lifting? Already, if you view powerlifting kind of as an other and then, equipped lifting, Eric said that equipped lifting is the hipster masochist choice for powerlifting, but you're going to learn a lot. And that's what I love about participating, even just in the conversations, a selfish reason, reframing your perspective, challenging some assumptions that you might have, right? Where for myself, it never really appealed to me, but I get and understand more the appeal of other people, why they do it.
Yeah, and it was really cool to kind of get that inside perspective, and from different people for different reasons. For example, Mike Tuchscherer, who's back on for the second time, one of the most decorated American powerlifters in history in the IPF, started in an era where there really only was single ply, and then switched to raw because that was kind of his preference, and as he said, what got him originally into lifting, even though he had literally achieved the highest honors an equipped lifter could, winning at the World Games back in, I believe, 2009. And then he went on to do the same, of course, as a raw lifter, winning multiple world championships and national titles. And then we have Bryce Krawczyk, who is, I think a multi-time Canadian national champion and who's competed back-to-back years. 2018, he competed at the Raw Worlds in Calgary, and then he just recently competed in Equip Worlds. And he's highly competitive in both. He took a silver in the deadlift just recently. And then we have Natalie Hansen, who also got into the sport. And kind of her experience was that the natural progression was from raw to equipped, which that perception I'd say is probably changed now. And as a raw is kind of in its heyday right now, where it's the most participated aspect of IPF and USAPL, especially lifting. But anyway, she is a multi-time national and world champion, just recently competed in Open Worlds, placed second. She has won Worlds before, and they're all coaches. So we have a really cool mix of perspectives from the coaching and athlete perspective from different eras. I think it's a real treat. And it was an eye-opener for me as someone who has been involved in raw powerlifting for 13 years now, and I've only competed raw with wraps or raw with sleeves. So, and I've never coached any equipped lifter. So it was a learning opportunity for me as well.
No, it's a fantastic episode, and I just want to say a quick note, a tangent actually, because I normally say it at the end, but we're doing battle with a lot of health and fitness podcasts. If you want to help out the cause, you can leave a rating and review on iTunes. We're currently battling podcasts labeled Sex with Emily. Is who we routinely are. Yeah, it's like we're number 55, they're number 54. And so we're here to spread the cult. If you're a true disciple, a true acolyte, rating review on iTunes does help out for some reason on the algorithm and help us defeat the barely functioning adult podcast. That's another one that we're doing battle with.
Wow, I didn't even know those were folks we're battling with. I feel like maybe we need to look at what tags and what categories we place ourselves in. Like, is there maybe something we need to look at there, Omar?
No, so we're definitely in the sexual category, sex and health. Like it's just our chemistry. I think by default the algorithm put us in there because they sense that.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a category for in the closet male on male sexual tension?
Oh, we would be in the league of our own.
I feel like we would.
I'm sure someone
we should pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, someone's written a fan.
You can pat me on the back. I'll pat you on the
right,
back.
Right. Someone's written a fan fiction about us. I'm sure it exists out there.
You found my article?
Oh,
I mean, what?
Oh, wait, what? So I think everyone is going to enjoy this episode. Equip lifting. I just want to say welcome to Natalie in particular because I have a vague but strong feeling that she's likely to be our first ever 3-time guest. We're not going to go into the details of why besides being just an excellent person, but all we got to say is you make our job, where it's not really a job, as easy as possible. We are joined by some very strong individuals today. I do want to hand out an award. And it's not the award everyone's thinking before we begin. If I may, Eric, is that okay?
Oh, I'm down.
Yeah.
I always like awards.
Yeah. And normally we give out participation awards, but this one's a little bit more poignant, I think, to the heart and soul of Iron Culture. And that would be Mike Teixeira, who's returning also for a second time, wins the award for the most existential analogy ever given on Iron Culture. And as individuals that dwell in the nihilism, that dwell right in the chaotic world of forms, we loved it when you spoke of autoregulation and periodization. And he outdid Plato with the cave. It's this idea, he's like, periodization and autoregulation is like being stuck in a cave where it's completely dark and all the rocks are forever moving and changing and you have no idea what's going on and there's no light that will illuminate. All you have is a small pen light that doesn't even quite work well. And those are your biopsychosocial feedback. And then you have a map. Your map is your training program. You don't know if the map actually is going to get you out of the cave, but it's a map and it gives you some sort of comfort as to where you're going. And he just it was like a 3-minute analogy and we're all silent afterwards. So welcome back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of that, you're like, oh, so the sun's going to explode and nothing really matters anymore. Okay, cool. Got it.
Yeah. We it was interesting. We saw 2 things happen in our statistics after that episode. We saw a lot more people who liked the episode, but the overall number of subscribers decreased by about 10%. Simultaneously, we saw the general statistic in the world that suicides were up 10%. So I don't know if they're related, but that's just what happened. Anyway, Iron Culture's doing well today. So yeah.
The few that remain. And we have also the legendary Canadian lifter. And we're going to do proper introductions, but Bruce Crawfish in the house. I can't believe that we have the legend himself. So no one knows this, but I know this from talking with Bruce. He won back-to-back awards for best Pizza Hut, was it, employee? Was that right, bro?
I actually never won any awards, but I do make a very fine pizza.
Thank you. Yeah,
and I robbed of that opportunity. I should have won some awards, I think.
Well, you know what? We'll give it out here on Iron Culture.
Yeah.
We'll say officially, you are the best Pizza Hut employee. And we define that as being on Iron Culture and us telling you that. That's the stipulation for that award.
In Northwestern Canada. We have to be very specific. Yeah. I do.
Not Eastern Canada, there's probably too many contenders for you to handle.
Yeah.
And Eric,
start small.
I think we should just start with a serious question and not really do intros. How do we feel about Westside? Because we're talking about equipped lifting today. Raw versus equipped. One word.
I'm going to start us off with saying I think it's arguably the best side, but I mean I don't know how other people feel.
You just want to.
Thanks for clarifying if we were actually being serious or just like faux serious. So I really didn't know, so I was panicking for a few seconds there. So thanks, Eric.
Hey, no, we're here to keep you in a constant state of panic.
Yeah,
I mean for the guests,
it's best
ourselves.
When it's that way. Yeah,
my heart rate is very high.
Listening. Excellent. And is that just because you moved up a weight class? That's just kind of a general status, or
it's a ratcheting thing.
Awesome. So I think really briefly, it would be helpful maybe if we do actually do introductions. Omar, what do you think?
We could try it.
Okay, this crazy idea for having a podcast that actually goes somewhere. So why don't we start with the new lad on the block, Bruce? Tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is not actually Bruce Crawfish. but I'm a Canadian powerlifter, and
You can tell us your actual name if you want.
Oh, my actual name, the real name is Bryce Krawczyk. Been competing for about 7 years, and had a fair bit of success raw, and then switched over to equipped about 2 years ago. And now I'm hoping to make a run at contending in the World Games. So I feel like that's kind of an interesting perspective. So that's my introduction as it's relevant to today's discussion, I think.
Awesome. And you also do some coaching, yes?
Yes, absolutely. I run a coaching company called Calgary Barbell. We make some YouTube videos. We've worked with Omar a few times before, and we do a whole lot of coaching.
And I can just say I really love the content on your channel. I think it's really useful and very cool. Well, very well done. Obviously, a lot of effort goes into it.
Thank you.
And also, congrats on your recent performance at Worlds.
Thank you.
Do you want to go over that a little bit?
Yeah, so I ended up just missing the cutoff for A flight or B flight, however you want to do it. The strong guys flight. I just missed the strong guys flight on nominations, and was able to climb up from, I think, 13th to 6th place from B group. Posted the heaviest total in CPU history, and walked away with a bunch of PRs and a silver medal in the deadlift. So I'm a happy camper. Sets me up to do well in the coming years.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, one of the best deadlifters in the game, and that's true of both raw and equipped. So it's just very cool to have you on. Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and then we'll go in order of who's on the left to the right on my screen, which is completely arbitrary. So Natalie,
Okay.
welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back, and on a completely different topic, which is kind of cool. So I have a head cold, so if I'm sneezing or coughing, I apologize. I'll mute myself. But I've been competing like Bryce for 7 years now. I did my first meet in 2012. I competed exclusively raw for the first 3 or 4 years of it. Did my first equipped meet in 2015, and from there just decided that I really enjoyed the challenge and the complexities of equipped powerlifting. It kind of it added a lot to the experience for me, and I can't really look back at this point. So yeah, I've competed at Open Worlds 4 times now. Just finished the same meet that Bryce did a couple weeks ago, and now we're just headed toward 2020.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to have you back. And also, you do some coaching as well, I believe, through Corvus. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Yep. I do online coaching.
Love it. And yeah, just want to say I appreciate the campaign that you and Corvus did to donate the proceeds from your t-shirt sales towards suicide prevention. Something very close to my heart.
Yeah.
And it's still on, folks.
Yeah, it's never going to end. So it's an ongoing campaign. And I'll just make quarterly donations based on the sales from the previous quarter.
I love it. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for being on. Congrats on your recent performance at Worlds. I don't know if you want to take a second to talk about that at all.
I took silver at Open Worlds. I squatted 265 kilos, benched 195, and pulled 202 and a half. It ties the second best total I've ever hit. So 662 and a half. My best ever is 671. So I'm kind of stuck with 662 and a half for the last 3 meets that I've done, which is a little frustrating, but
yeah.
We'll get there.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you went for a big pull on your third to try to move up a rank, yeah?
No. So the third pull, the original number would have taken the lead had Rhea not made her third pull. But she went 215 as well. So she pulled 215. We had 215 in. Didn't want to change it. There was no 215 was a reach on that day anyway, so we just stuck with it. Yeah. Got it.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure that motivates the hell out of you because you're a highly competitive person, which I love. And now we have Mike T, the guy who, unlike these other two who started raw and when equipped, you actually started in an era where there was pretty much just single ply, right? In the IPF.
Yeah, when it got to I think real legitimate organized competitions, equipped lifting was the default, and there wasn't really a raw division unless you specifically sought out a raw competition, and there just weren't that many. And it wasn't until really about 2009 and 10 when Ross really started picking up steam, which also kind of coincided with the height of my equipped powerlifting. And then 2012 was the first classic World Cup in Sweden for the IPF. So what we know today is, U.S. Raw Nationals, Raw Worlds in the IPF and things like that didn't really exist prior to 2012. Well, I suppose Nationals did a couple years prior to that, but it didn't really get big to that point. It wasn't on a global scale until 2012. My powerlifting career started in 2003, and like you said, it was equipped for that whole first chapter. And then later on, I got more interested in the raw stuff and kind of dabbled over there for the time that I was competing.
Very cool. Yeah, I know from my experience, when I first got into powerlifting, my first meet was in 2006. And then when my wife and I moved to California, like USAPL was just not really an option because they didn't have any raw meets or raw divisions. And there was a local APA meet where they always had a raw division. And they eventually went all the way raw in, I think, 2009. But it seemed like, actually, it's funny because I think today, the average lifter who's been involved would say, yeah, if you want to do raw, that the big meets to do and the dominant federation would be USAPL and IPF. But there was a time period in that kind of transition where it seemed like USAPL was a little late to the party, because I know that APA meet in California, when it switched to raw, it doubled in size and had to start going to multi-platforms. And it was like a bunch of these raw lifters were waiting for the opportunity to have a raw meet in Northern California. And it wasn't until, like you said, 2012, 2011, that USAPL kind of jumped on the bandwagon. But now they are the bandwagon.
So the first Raw Nationals was 2008. But before that, a lot of people did just lift raw in those equipped USAPL meets just because that's, that was their option, unless they were in a different federation. But yeah, the first Raw Nationals, I think it was in Killeen, right? In 2008. And it was like in a church or something. It was like a very tiny building. Yeah, it was really, looking back, it's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. I did one that would have had to been 2010, 11, in a church ballroom or something like that. And I remember a couple years later in Orlando, when the U.S. national meet got up to like 300 lifters, and having conversations with people like, can you believe how big this meet has gotten? Like, it's just like, maybe we should do something about like how big it's gotten. We don't want it to get out of hand, right? And then it goes up to 1,200 in just a few years.
Yeah, the explosion is pretty nuts. How popular not only just raw lifting, but powerlifting in general has grown a ton, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I think a good place to start, because we do have folks who are just bodybuilders. We've hopefully got some weightlifters. We hopefully got some folks who are from different disciplines of the iron game who know nothing about powerlifting, or maybe very little. What is equipped lifting and what is raw lifting? Can we get some basic operational definitions? Bryce, let's hear from you, buddy.
So I would say raw lifting is defined as the use of belt, wrist wraps, knee sleeves, sometimes knee wraps, which, I mean, I think that lack of distinction there's like classic raw and this raw and that raw, and they kind of differentiate whether or not they use knee wraps. But not using suits and shirts, I would say, is probably a good way to define raw lifting. And then I guess equipped lifting would be the use of said supportive, they kind of look like singlets, but suits, and then bench shirts to, long story short, to allow the lifter to lift more weight.
Gotcha. Now, Mike, you've had a pretty cool thing going on the RTS podcast, where you've had some of the legends, who are the living legends, I should say, of powerlifting on. I think you've called the Titans of powerlifting, if that's correct. Yeah. I've been loving that. So for anyone who is interested in the history of powerlifting, I would definitely recommend check out the RTS podcast. Mike's had a lot of folks who've been competing, some of them still competing, since even the 60s and 70s. I think your most recent, Ricky Dale Crane, that was a cool episode. So you've had a number of opportunities to talk to folks about how gear has changed over time. So could you talk us through a little bit of like, what is single ply, what's double ply, how have the equipment evolved from these conversations that you've had, and walk us through kind of how we get to where we are today, and then what is like modern single ply versus modern multiply lifting. That would be a really cool, I think, primer.
Sure. So I'm not sure on the year as far as when this actually got started. My understanding is that it starts with people wearing tighter and tighter singlets, tighter and tighter t-shirts, and then realizing, well, hey, if we use a different material that's not just a t-shirt, then they would feel a little bit more support from it. But we're talking about in the neighborhood of whatever they could touch and go bench in the gym, they could pause bench in a competition. It was really, really minor impacts to the amounts of weight lifted. And then things began to evolve, more advanced materials get used, differences in designs and things like that. One thing that did, I think, slow down a lot of the evolution was that at some point, Inzer acquired a patent for the bench shirt. So when I came on the scene, you could get an Inzer bench shirt, and there were some kind of, at least in single ply, it was like the Inzer bench shirt, and that was about it. And they're the old heavy duty and high performance heavy duty, and like they have all these kind of campy names for what all that was, and it would hurt a lot. It kind of feel like it was cutting under your arm, and people weren't getting that much out of it. Some people could get 40 pounds, but that seemed like a lot, and most people were closer to 20 on the bench. And squat suits had evolved in material a bit, and they were a little bit closer to what you see in like modern single ply squat suits, although the material isn't quite the same as what it is now. After the patent expired for Inzer's bench shirt, Titan came out with the Titan Fury bench shirt, which was pretty revolutionary in design. So whereas everything else had been constructed more or less like a t-shirt, the Fury was different because it had a chest panel that was made out of a very stiff material. Now we can talk about things like canvas and polyester and stuff like that, but if you've never seen any of this before, imagine like a thick, heavy material like denim or like canvas. It's not exactly those things when we're talking about a poly suit, but it feels like that if you've never touched any of this before.
Okay.
The Fury, though, was different in that it's like a straight chest panel, and the sleeves come straight out from the chest as if you're holding a bench press. And it really changed kind of how people were thinking about bench shirt designs. And then they started putting the sleeves on an angle, changing lots of different things about it. And it pretty quickly evolved into the F6 and the Katana that are a lot more popular today. And I suppose that's kind of the single ply stuff. Kind of in parallel, there's the multiply that it seems to me was kind of at peak popularity in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. So multiply refers to having multiple layers of this material. So single ply competition only allows for one layer. Multiply is going to allow for multiple layers. The equipment that was available to multiply lifters seems to me that it was more like small shops, kind of people doing it in their homes and stuff like that. Like they weren't kind of proper businesses. Like how you wouldn't like go there and buy a bench shirt. You called them on the phone and gave them your measurements, and they'd get it to you in a couple weeks, kind of thing. And yeah, so and that's where you would hear about things more like canvas squat suits or denim bench shirts. That again seemed to peak in the early 2000s, and I'll be honest, I'm not terribly familiar with that whole scene now. Although I'm sure I do know that people still compete in multiply and are still doing well with it. I just am not familiar in terms of like how the gear has evolved on that side of it.
Right. I think that's really helpful. And Omar, you'll appreciate this. Here at Iron Culture, we try to make connections between the iron game. So Omar is a big proponent in kind of the bodybuilding world of wearing progressively smaller shirts in lieu of actually making gains to kind of look more muscular. So it's interesting that Omar's evolution for upper body faux hypertrophy has also followed the evolution of kind of the equipped bench press shirt world.
Eric, I really don't want to participate in this conversation because I'm in fact boycotting powerlifting by and large until they reinstate the number one exercise that everyone cares about, the bicep curl. So, I mean, we can continue with this conversation if we like, but if I have a silence moving forward, it's in protest.
There are some federations that compete in a strict curl still to this day.
No.
Awesome. And Omar's back in the conversation. Thank you, Bryce.
Please come back. Please.
I was falling asleep. I'm like single ply, multiply. I'm like, I haven't heard a bicep curl in about 15 minutes.
That's actually a good point. I don't know that there is equipped lifting for the strict curl.
I was just imagining, like, how do you rig up a ram? How can you rig up like a Titan ram to give you a whole bunch of bounce or something? I guess you start from, but I don't know.
Yeah, like you can't even actually get to lock out. Like maybe it's like a tricep thing. Like and then like so like you need like 300 pounds to even get to the bottom. Yeah. And like you start curling, and then you start people just doing partials because that's the only part that you actually have to do most of the muscular work on.
They'll have like different varying board curls.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Going to like almost full range of motion, then a 2/3 kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
See,
What's your max three-board curl?
Idea.
I don't know.
It's going to validate like all the people that want to do restricted range of motion curl work. Like you just say that you're training for an equipped bicep curl competition. You know.
Yeah. Well,
think about how many people that'll bring into the fold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the next wave.
We're going to recruit the next cult members. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Mike, thank you for that really, I think that's really going to help a lot of our listeners understand kind of where the world of single ply, multiply comes from and where we're at today. And it also might help people understand why when you go to like an IPF competition, there's an equipment check and there's a list of this is approved, this is not, because someone could easily come in with multiply if there wasn't any kind of, operational control over that. Now, I also liked how you mentioned how it started out with a shirt that might give you a few pounds, or at least your touch and go was the same as your pause bench with the shirt. And now, I correct me if I'm wrong, but the single ply, like the amount you can get out of single ply, is much more than probably even the early multiply stuff. I've been really impressed just by the kind of. I remember when I was first looking at some of the single ply numbers. In like the bench press specifically, it wasn't these huge leaps that you see now, and I think it's interesting to see that the equipment has changed. Just as a small aside, we were in one of our issues of mass, we were talking about how the peak age at which powerlifters are the best, and there was a study that came out kind of looking at powerlifters and weightlifters, and one of the things that we had to bring up in peer review was, hey, like, we're seeing these numbers go up, but we're looking at equipped lifters. Is it possible in some of these longer career spans that their totals are going up, even though their biological age is going up past their quote unquote peak, maybe because they've lived through two different eras of equipment? So it's something we have to consider. On that note, Natalie, I would love to hear what are your best numbers, and I would love to get everyone's thoughts on this, both raw and then roughly around the same time equipped, so people can get kind of an idea of the differential between the two.
So my best squat in competition, I'll just give you all my competition PRs, is 197.5 raw, and my best in gear is 273.5.
So it's right around, let's see, that's 190, yeah, it's a little bit 4 pounds for the Americans. I can't do it off the top. 435-ish?
435 and 604.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
My best competition bench is 117.5 and raw, and my best competition bench in a shirt is 202. So that's 259 and 259 and 445.
Something. Yeah, 445. Close enough.
445.
A lot.
So, and then deadlift is my best competition pull is 446, 202.5. in raw, and equipped is 215, which is 474.
Something like that. But so so the smallest gap is in the deadlift. And I think when we think about that, that's because there's no preceding stretch shortening cycle motion that you can actually get some rebound from, kind of the way this works. Would you say that Natalie, is a normal amount that someone might get out of their equipment, or are you pretty damn good with equipment?
I think that the squat and bench are pretty high. That they're on the high end of, I don't think they're like outrageous, but they're on the high end of like, normal-ish.
And that's something that I want to, sorry to interrupt. That's something that I really want to emphasize, because I know sometimes you'll read these very polarizing comments online where people are like, oh, it's cheating, Yeah. And it almost kind of is so ignorant to the amount of technical expertise and the fact that it's a very different skill that one has to develop. And when you were talking about kind of introducing yourself, you said, I really liked some of the technical aspects of equip lifting, and you haven't looked back, because it adds another layer. So if you could talk more about that and your experience of, like, why is it you haven't looked back, and what is that experience like of the technical mastery in equip lifting?
I mean, the reality is that even if we identify as an equipped lifter, and you almost only compete as an equipped lifter, it's still, 70% of my training is raw, maybe even more than that. I'm only in gear like 8 to 10 weeks, and that's only one time per lift per week, and everything else is still raw. So I still get that like physical, I get to feel like I'm, like working hard. I'm not, it's not just about like putting my gear on in this whole stressful experience. So I always kind of preface with that, because people are like, how often do you lift raw? And I'm like, all the time. And we're still pushing raw strength. Like, that's still a pretty foundational piece of our training, is you're still trying to get stronger raw. So I think that the kind of cherry on top for me was having to really like pay attention technically to my lifts, especially, I mean, squat and bench just come so naturally for me. And so it's really fun for me to kind of break those lifts down and try to figure out like, how to squat with the, best technique that's going to help me get the most carryover out of my squat suit, and really just kind of like get into the weeds on it. And I think I have a, pretty like detail focused brain. I'm like interested in technique. I like to watch people lift, not even for the load on the bar. Sometimes it's just watching them move. And so I think that that's just kind of naturally where I gravitated to. And then it helps that I'm squatting 600 pounds and benching over 400 pounds. Like, that's fun. That's in itself, like, from a really like, kind of animalistic, like, I'm just trying to get as strong as possible, to be able to load 550 and or 600 pounds on the bar and like squat it is pretty awesome. And so, so going back to a 400 or mid 300 or 400 pound squat is kind of like, I don't know why is this like, this isn't that exciting when I can do this with 200 pounds more on my back.
So that's something I would like to ask you, is like, so I've done, just for everyone who knows, I've never done any equipped lifting at all. I've done like heavy walkouts or some board presses or some quote unquote overload work, but I've never been in a situation where I could overload my raw lifts by to the degree that you can with equipment. Like, is that pretty scary or intimidating? Or does your body feel quote unquote ready for that when you first do it?
Yeah, it is scary. And that's part of, I think, what keeps us coming back, right? Is because it's a little bit of fear and adrenaline and like, and I would say that's a big piece of it, but, I don't, what was your second question? Whether or not
just basically like, what is that experience like? I just kind of want to get the experiential feeling of what it's like to almost double your bench press. Like, for me, I can't conceptualize what it would be like to put a whole other 300 pounds on top of what I'm currently doing, Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, like, in my brain, they're different lifts. So it doesn't to me feel like, oh my God, I bench, almost just only like, almost 120 kilos raw. And like, this is scary to load 180. it's like, it's kind of a different thing in my brain. It's a different movement. It's a different skill. And so I think I've separated them. So it's not necessarily that I'm trying to, I'm still trying to get stronger raw, like I said, but I'm not necessarily trying to get stronger raw so that my equipped bench will follow, because that doesn't necessarily work that way. So the equipped bench is like, in my brain, it's its own entire thing that I'm trying to master as its own piece, because that's kind of where my mentality is about it, about carryover and like how scary it is to load up more weight. I'm like, oh, it's kind of a different movement.
Right. That's, and I actually have a question for you, Bryce, because I met you 2018 in Calgary.
Yep.
And you were competing in Raw Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And then now this year you just did Equip World. So one of my thoughts, like this is something that is a discussion in kind of the motor learning community is, hey, we can do these some exercises where you load a sport specific pattern, but you got to be careful if it starts changing the velocity or the accuracy of it, because that can become a problem. So in my mind, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, Natalie, that you really have to look at them as separate lifts so that they don't step on each other, because there are some different ways of executing the movement. So Bryce, if you could talk a little bit about that and how you balance it as someone who just in back-to-back years has competed in both sides of the sport.
I think for me, I actually I strive for a certain degree of sameness between the two. And I think that's one of the things that's allowed me to have some proficiency kind of right out of the gate with equipped lifting is I guess wrapping my head around the idea of trying to make the suit and the wraps do what I want it to do and do how I would normally perform the squat, and especially the deadlift. I think that's a real easy one to kind of get thrown around a little bit by the suit, and to feel like it should be a different movement because you don't, like you said, you don't have that sort of lowering phase to load things up. So it's a bit of a challenge. There are definitely some differences, I think, especially in the bench press. There are some, like maybe a lower touch point and some of those kinds of things. So I think being current in both of those, and like Natalie said, we almost always train raw alongside it. So we have those movements, I think, that are quite different. And then some, I think, depending on the lifter, are going to be actually more the same than I think maybe people would anticipate.
Oh, that's interesting. It sounds like it's very much whoever you are. If you do both, you have to have some type of conceptualization so that you can not have them either compete or be the same so that they don't interfere with one another. Yeah. And it's interesting you guys have gotten to the same point through different kind of perceptions of the lifts. So Mike, let me ask you from a programming perspective, what are some of the key differences when you're writing a training block for an equipped lifter versus a raw lifter? What might that look like if there are generalities?
Generally, one thing that you see very commonly with, let's say, equipped bench press is a greater focus on lockout strength. I suppose that's fairly similar in the squat, although it is less pronounced. With the bench, you'll see a lot of equipped benchers doing lots of very tricep specific movements. I tend to favor Natalie's viewpoint of like how she's conceptualizing it as its own thing. Your aim is to get better at this specific incantation of the skill, almost, that you're trying to get better at the equipped bench or the equipped squat, and you're doing the things that move that forward. And in general, you'll see more things like partial ranges of motion for the bench, occasionally for the deadlift, not really for the squat. And I think a lot of that has to do with depth always being in question. You're always fighting the suit for depth. And I think that we just kind of don't want anything to interfere with our perception of where the bottom is. So I think that's maybe one reason you don't see partials for the squat as much. But things like bands and chains kind of have their roots in training equipped powerlifters. I think there's, not to veer off too much on a tangent, I think there's value in a lot of different settings for all these different tools, but they're most common in equipped powerlifting, and probably most valuable in that setting as well, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think
No, that makes you go ahead, Natalie.
just worth pointing out on the partial range of motions, especially in bench press. I think one, sometimes it's for that like lockout strength, but also it's the goal is to improve proficiency in, like segments of the movement on the way down to the chest, because oftentimes it requires so much weight to touch that it's more stimulus than you want for that training, whatever that training protocol is. So you'll do a one board or a two board press with something lighter, or you can do it with something heavier. It kind of works on both ends to like work on technique without having to like throw too much at you. So if you think about somebody who's maybe never squatted before, they can barely do a body weight squat to depth. Sometimes we sacrifice the competition specific like squat to depth just so that they can learn like the top half of the movement, and then increase that progression as they get more proficient. And I think there's benefits to partial ranges of motion in for sure bench, maybe a deadlift from kind of a high block down to a low block, but and then also when we're breaking in new equipment, which we'll probably get into a little bit.
Absolutely. This I think this is a brief story I'll tell that kind of shows how much as a raw lifter I've not been exposed to this world. But over 10 years ago, my old workout partner, good friend, myself and Adam were doing a powerlifting meet in 2008. And again, this was a time when we would go lift raw in an equipped meet and just get our asses handed to us, and we would just try to compete for our own PB. And it was, we had just finished squatting, and we had done I think we'd maybe done our first attempt on bench, and then we went really quick to just grab some food, and we heard pull, 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 and we both freaked out, and we're like, oh my God, did we miss our second and third attempt on bench? And we ran back into the room, and it's this guy who has not yet got the press command because he's still trying to pull the bar to his chest, and he was apparently wearing someone else's bench shirt. He didn't have his, or just it was the first time using it. And for reference, the guy had over 4 plates on the bar, so over 405 pounds. And this is a dude who had just back in April popped positive in a natural bodybuilding show and was a huge guy and competed in an NPC show later. So this is a enhanced bodybuilder trying to row over 405 to his chest. And so the weight of 405 plus whatever his max on his back row would be for a gigantic bodybuilder was not enough to get the bar to touch his chest. So it just goes to show you there's a certain level of complexity. And then where the actual assistance is obviously the more and more stretch that's put on the shirt. And I think that might give people some idea of some of these old adages of training advice that have come out of that era that, Mike, you were talking about in that late 90s, early 2000s, where I would say kind of the dominant voices in training wisdom were from equipped lifters. I think, man, when I was getting on the scene and first getting involved in powerlifting, there was just starting to be new voices besides Westside. So I think I would love to hear your guys' perspective on how, I don't know, am I accurate in saying that the kind of the words of wisdom were very one-sided and all from one place at a certain time in powerlifting?
I definitely think that a lot of those like original cues. I mean, when I first got into powerlifting, it was sit back in your squat. It was like worry about your lats, tuck your elbows, pull the bar in on your bench. And on the deadlift, it was just to like push your knees out as hard as you can and wedge your hips as close to the bar as you can. And yeah, I mean, there are some contexts where those are useful for a raw lifter, but definitely way more applicable to the equipped side of things. The squat suit, if you're new to it, generally you're going to have a tendency to kind of come down forward onto your toes, and you really need to actively kind of sit back into it. The bench, like your story just illustrated, obviously you need to kind of pull the bar in a little bit more. And in the deadlift, that's exactly how you load that suit up, is trying to pull yourself a little bit more upright. And I think those cues became so sort of pervasive throughout powerlifting that everybody thought this is how you had to lift, period. And I think there's been now a very different number of voices cueing a very different number of things, and hopefully it's become more individual and nuanced than that. But I think that also just kind of speaks to the popularity of the sport and the growth in that overall.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, Mike, any thoughts on that?
This is semi off topic, but just something that I'm curious about, particularly from Natalie and Bryce's perspective. For me, I never understood the pull the bar to the chest thing for the bench. Like, and to be a little bit more clear, I think a lot of times lifters will struggle for depth in the squat, struggle for a touch on the bench, but a lot of times it's not the suit, it's not the shirt that's preventing it. It's that they're too wound up and unable to relax in the right ways. You have to relax a certain way in order for the shirt to load up so that you can get the touch. Like, that's one of the reasons I love to program rep work in equipment, which lifters hate. It's miserable,
rightfully so.
Yeah,
The right to it.
Yeah, and it was miserable for me too, but there's something to be said about it's a different kind of fatigue that you get from equipped lifting, and I'm kind of maybe going too far afield here, but it's a different kind of fatigue in general. There's a lot of just pressure in your head. It's a lot of weight. You get tired quickly, and if you're going to do 5 reps with this, by the 5th rep, you'll find a little bit more space in the bottom. You'll find a little more depth, a little bit closer to touch because you're tired and you're looking for it in a little bit different way than you would if you were fresh just doing a single repetition. So it never really resonated with me to pull it down because you're kind of scared to do that and things can go sideways so fast. So I don't know if that resonates with you guys and your experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I've never that to pull the bar or row it. I guess you can kind of see what people are saying when they say row, but pulling, no, like it's never been a thing for me. So, but I've also never had a hard time touching. So that might be a difference between me and someone who has a harder time touching. Maybe that is something they have to do. But in my brain, if you can't touch, I'm not like pulling. I think that I'm not trying to pull the bar down to me. I'm trying to reach up to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it. And I definitely think that there's probably more advantage. And this, again, goes back to those 5s. I was coaching an equipped shirt guy for one of the first times yesterday, and I had him do a set of 5 and he couldn't get a touch. I was trying to teach him just basically to be patient because, like you said, you kind of have to just relax in the right way. And I think patience is a big thing. People tend to kind of put too much into the isometric, and if you just like let the bar go, like just be patient and let it kind of sink into the shirt, you'll be a lot closer to that touch. But it's funny, you take 20 or 30 kilos off the bar, you have somebody do a set of 5, and by that 5th rep, they're probably closer to touching than they were with the like heavy singles at the beginning, because they're just like, holy crap, I want this to be over, just like bring it down as fast as it needs to go. And yeah, I've definitely found a lot of utility in the higher reps, which again goes against that sort of initial I don't know, what I was always told initially getting into equipment was like, oh yeah, nothing over 2s or 3s, or you have to be straps down, or you have to use boards, or you have to do this. And it's like, no, you can do like a set of 4 or 5 and suit and wraps. You can do multiple sets of 4 or 5 and wraps and suit. And it's interesting to see those kind of old conventions change as people who are a little bit less afraid of challenging those conventions start to get into this stuff.
I think you have to weigh the pros and cons though, because there's you guys are talking about like one benefit to doing reps, sets of 5 in gear, but I think that there are a lot of reasons not to. So like, just if I'm applying that to myself as a lifter, like I can already tell you a few things that are going to happen if I try to do a set of 5 with my straps up in wraps on squat. My belt is going to be misplaced by rep 3. Like that in itself, the legs on my suit are going to be either rolled up or they're going to slide up. And so by rep 5, I might not even be able to do that, like stand up with that weight. And plus my first 3 reps are probably going to be high as a kite. Right. So I think that I've watched a lot of people who do high reps. You know, Priscilla Ribic does 5s on a pretty regular basis in her gear. But that's never worked for me. Anytime I've tried to do reps, it was, you know, the trade-off was that I'm losing position. I'm stretching my gear out. That's a concern that I would have. Mm-hmm. And then also that like things are so haywire by the 4th or 5th rep that like I'm putting myself at risk.
Right. So go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
So I think we might be in 2 very different camps on that, because I like doubles is the highest I'll program for anyone.
Well, maybe not as much as you think. I mean, I think anytime we're going to talk about a tool, you have to acknowledge the uses and the weaknesses of that tool, mm-hmm. you know, so that you can use it properly. You know, and you're talking about very serious concerns that you would have doing rep work. So like if I was writing it and you were like, hey, here's the problems with doing 5s, I would say, okay, you know, then we won't do 5s. Mm-hmm. You know, we'll find some other way to accomplish that goal. Like there's very little that, you know, I think is kind of a non-negotiable mm-hmm. on the training side.
For sure.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is that for me, it was kind of eye-opening to see that you can do this stuff. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that you have to or that it's better than anything else, but like it is possible, right? That's yeah.
You may hate yourself afterwards.
So Omar, I think this is an interesting thing. So we're flies on the wall here, while we're listening to 3 experienced coaches and athletes at a high level working with equipment, talking about, you know, differences in programming, different potential ideologies, but really it's more of like a tool, like you were saying, Mike. And to me, the thing I was thinking is, man, in the early era where some of this information was getting distributed, when there was kind of a singular voice, like Westside, like you brought up, that trickled down to lifters who never had competed or competed in powerlifting, who just lifted raw. I remember when I first started training for powerlifting and I was competing in raw lifting, I was doing box squats. I was doing a ton of tricep work. I was doing a ton of lat work. I was sitting back, and I was, man, I think from 2006 to about 2008, I was doing a lot of things which really objectively now I don't think make a lot of sense. And it makes me think, how could I'm almost going to sound a little vindictive here, accusatory, but how could you say, like, you guys don't know how to bench, here's how you bench, and just put it out there and not go, oh, and by the way, I wear a multiply shirt. You know, like that seems irresponsible to me. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, Omar, as someone who's engages with kind of the everyday lifter, how long have these echoes been something that you've seen in the lifting world?
So I think first it's partially generational. I say that because Sean, who owns Force Fitness, is a Westside disciple. Bryce met him, and Sean's a fantastic guy. He actually trains raw. He's a natural lifter, but he's applying an ideology, I would say, really, and it is an ideology that's for equipped, enhanced lifters. And that's when he got into powerlifting. He got into powerlifting 20 years ago. And so it makes sense that that's kind of his worldview and his paradigm. And you do see it echo down, as you stated, Eric. But there have been individuals, and for myself, actually, when I've joined a real strength gym, because I would say, you have the 60s and 70s era lifters, where I was part of a gym prior to Fortis Fitness that was kind of a mom and pop gym, but it used to be an old school bodybuilding gym. And there's this individual by the name of Tom who was a raw lifter. He was 73 at the time. So he's lifting in the 60s and 70s, former bodybuilder, but also did powerlifting. And his style training and his cues and everything that he talked about and the other individuals at this mom and pop gym are once again very raw specific. So that whole equipped lifting fad totally missed him. And then you have individuals like Sean in the 90s, and then with the advent of more magazines, online articles being written, kind of the new generation of lifters is kind of back to cues that might not apply to raw lifters. An interesting fact, however, I would say I was very fortunate, and I have to give a thank you to Jeremy Hamilton, a raw competitor, just a monster of a lifter who held at one time the 220 all-time weight class world record, that he was an advocate, and there was an individual to give someone else that I think shifted the paradigm, because we talked being a fly on the wall for a while, Eric. I think Candido had a monumental impact on the USAPL and on the IPF in general. He's one of the catalysts. But I also have to say, definitely before him, the original John the Baptist voice crying in the wilderness would actually be Dan Green, because he wrote a highly influential article called West of West Side. And he echoed a lot of things that a lot of raw lifters such as Jeremy Hamilton were feeling. And when I joined Fortis Fitness in 2012, I met up with Jeremy within 8 months. And I sidestepped. I was with Sean for a little bit, where Sean, I did a basic linear periodization deadlift program. Deadlift shot up. I did his squat program to a T, where I was doing RPE 12, like no joke, where, it's a 13-second rep, and just by the grace of Paimon, you make it. And I did it for 16 weeks, followed it, adhered to the program on point, and my squat budged 0 pounds. And that's when I kind of had to reevaluate things. But I think there are multiple factors, and I think maybe an interesting place to take it, Eric, would be talking about we spoke on the technical side, but now on the personal side of what compels someone to do equip lifting. The reason I say that is that Dan Green, when he wrote that West of West Side, and you saw Juggernaut Training at the time, Chad Wesley Smith, there's a few other individuals with the Cube method where, methodology related more to raw lifting started to become more popular, that then echoed some of the things in the drug tested community. So it's a culmination, I think, of a few different things. But I think an interesting area to take this topic, and maybe I'm being influenced by Bruce Crawfish wearing the equipped, bruised, tired shirt, which I think illustrates it perfectly, is what is the appeal on a personal level then for equip lifting versus raw lifting. So we went kind of macro, maybe micro, and a quick anecdote I just want to share is there's a few individuals that have done equip lifting, and I'm talking more multiply, that I've been fortunate enough to come into contact with. One was actually Mark Bell, where he stated as such, which was interesting. He said, I think powerlifting at its most pure is equip lifting, some of the things that attract individuals. So kind of maybe what Natalie said, and I want to hear everyone's thoughts. The danger aspect, the adrenaline rush that you get. There is an individual, however, that joined Fortis Fitness who recently broke, Vlad Azahov, a Russian lifter, who broke the 500 kilos. So he squatted just in wraps, so wraps and belts are raw, recently 1,100 pounds, but he held the all-time squat record at 1,200 pounds. He trained at Fortis Fitness, and I've never really talked, it's not relevant to my channel, but he came a big burly man. I'm talking damn near 400 pounds, and he trained there for 3 to 4 months. And I'd come in at night, he'd been at night, and we would just talk. And some of the things that he said I found very interesting on a personal level, why he enjoyed it. And for him being a Russian and doing multiply lifting is quite different, where part of the culture, it would be a more of a precedent is placed upon weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. And he's saying the thrill, the danger. There's that element where, from what I understood what he said, the masochism of like, can you do this? Like kind of beating yourself up. So I see Bryce's shirt and it says equipped, bruised, tired. And some of the things that he echoed, and that might be multiply specific, but I think on the personal level, the next area of the conversation, I'm just going to open up the floor, is what are some of those intrinsic motivating factors to make someone want to start equip lifting or stick with it? Like, what are some of the differences, individual potential differences, personality or otherwise, that motivates an individual to try out equip lifting versus raw lifting?
So I think for me, it probably echoes Natalie's sentiments a lot about the technicality of it, about sort of adding more layers, figuratively and literally, to powerlifting. For me, transitioning into it as somebody who had already had a fair bit of experience and success in raw powerlifting, one of the biggest things, and probably the biggest point I'll make here, is that it allowed me to be a bit of a novice again. It allowed me to have something where I could progress at a pretty rapid pace and feel like it's just open road ahead of me. Getting to where I was in raw lifting, and that's not to say I wouldn't have made more progress, but it started to slow down. Things started to slow down for sure. I noticed less progress per amount of time, sleep, stimulus, whatever invested. And as soon as I switched over to equip lifting, I was like, oh man, I'm not very good at this. I have so many places to improve and so much just potential. And that for me was really, really exciting. Obviously, putting an extra 100 kilos on your squat is pretty exciting too. But I think that was the biggest thing for me.
I do think, as far as the personalities go, Omar, I think that single ply powerlifters probably relate more to multiply personality wise and just kind of like what motivates single ply lifters than they do raw lifters, because there is just kind of this like stubborn, kind of a stubborn we're not in this for the glory. I mean, some people for sure are, but it's a little bit more of like, it's painful. It's not fun all the time, but we just keep showing up for whatever reason. But I think that's something I've always thought about. It's like, I feel like I can relate more to maybe the older school multiply lifters than I can to the raw generation.
So is it accurate to characterize you as a hipster masochist? Is that?
I think that sums up equipped lifting pretty neatly. Puts a little bow on it there. Yeah.
Here today to take my daily beating.
Yeah. But there is always something to improve. I think that, and Bryce kind of got into this. My last raw full meet was I had a really good performance, and I kind of ended on that. And I don't know if I didn't have anywhere to go from there, but I just felt like with equipped lifting, like every day there was something I could improve, and I could kind of tweak this, and I could try something else, and it just kind of left me like wanting more every time. So I come out of an equipped meet and I'm like, well, I've got like 10 things that I can work on, and if I improve those things, then we're going to see, massive improvements. And so then I back to the drawing board, quite, pretty literally. And let's see how we can improve these things, where raw was really just more about at the point where that Bryce and I got to in raw, it was just more about like we had the technique down, and it was just kind of like, all right, let's see how much we can how much stronger we can get without having any little like tweaks that we could make in a lot of ways.
So Eric, you mentioned that my kind of pathway through the sport has been kind of the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I got into the equipment because that's how, like, I was good at powerlifting, I was strong, and I wanted to compete. And I don't want to give up huge advantages. So of course I'm going to put on the equipment and do what I can to figure it out. And I think I did pretty well at it for a while. When raw started taking off, it was interesting to me.
I did pretty good at it for a while. It's got to be one of the biggest understatements of all time.
Wait, Mike, did you do an intro and you didn't? And can we go back to Mike's intro and like scrub it a little?
Numbers.
Add some things.
Yeah, maybe that you're the one of the only American World Games champions ever.
Just little things like that.
Little
all right, yeah. I won the World Games in 2009, which is probably the height of my powerlifting achievement. And the World Games is an equipped competition. And pretty much right after that, raw was taken off, and when raw got to the point where you could compete internationally, to me, I felt like that's kind of why I got into lifting weights in the beginning, was to see how strong I could get. And at that time, I had been competing equipped for a long time. And so raw had this kind of newness to it. And so I did that. Now, in the time since then, I've dabbled with the equipment again. Like, it took like 6 years and never touched it. And then I thought, I'm going to get the old bench shirt out for a training block and see how this goes. And it was really fun. And it's just what Natalie and Bryce are saying. It's a different kind of challenge. If you think of it like, well, it's a bench press, it's just way heavier than what you could do, with your own force and your own gumption. Well, no, it's not that. If you think of it like it's a different thing, and you're trying to be really good at this specific kind of skill. And yeah, strength is a really big component of it, but it's got these other big components of it too. Then, yeah, I mean, it's interesting in its own way. And I think how you approach it mentally does matter a lot.
It also, I was kind of raised in powerlifting by long, people who had been in the sport for 20 years. And the way I was introduced to lifting was basically you spend a few years developing your raw strength. This is like kind of the baseline. You get your raw strength up, you get your technique dialed in, and then you graduate to like putting equipment on. And that was as recent as 2014, 2015. That was like when I got to a certain point of raw strength, people started asking me, when are you going to do your first equip meet? And I'm like, what? At first I thought it was crazy, and then I got some suits.
Here we are.
Yeah.
I think another thing that is interesting and is a lot of fun about equipped powerlifting is just the difference in the competitions. And having done a few like raw and equipped meets in somewhat close proximity, there's just like there's this additional level of intensity and excitement in timing the reps and making your attempts on time, and getting the bench shirt just right. And like people are having near misses sometimes in the warm-up room, and then they go out and they smoke their lifts, or they go out and they hit their opener, and it's this 11 RPE crazy thing, and they put 20 kilos on it, and you're like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? And they go out and they just like smash the lift, and there's just so much more volatility, and people are bombing, and things are happening, and people are climbing from crazy positions to there's an element to that I just don't think is necessarily there in a lot of raw powerlifting. And there's definitely different things that are differently exciting, but there is a lot of those things that really kind of just make equipped competitions a lot more fun for me.
Yeah, I completely agree there. I think you have to be so perfect on timing and like meet day strategy, but there's also an element of like accomplishment if you completely fuck that up and you stand in your reps for 4 minutes and before your third squat, and then you go out and squat it like you stand up with it. You're like the level, it just feels like so much relief. We did that. I did that at Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody.
It's gotta be feeling like you can't stop me. I can stand in these reps forever.
I can't remember what happened, but for whatever reason, I was standing at the bottom of the ramp, like, what in the world is going on? There were like two lifters still to go. I had been wrapped already for an entire lifter, and they screwed something up. But like that level of just kind of like accomplishment and just like relief is that doesn't happen in raw.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely right about the number of intricacies. Like there's intricacies in the technical execution of the lift, in the timing, and in the coaching, in the culture, like social norms and things like that happen in the warm-up room. There's just a lot more going on because it's so much further outside of the conventional experience, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I had almost a polar opposite experience to Natalie on my third squat, where I ended up somebody was allowed to scratch their attempt for some reason, I think 2 lifters before they were supposed to go. So we had already started wrapping, and the ideal situation is a person either puts in an attempt or scratches their attempt, meaning they get skipped over in the order. Now this person, for whatever reason, was allowed to scratch their attempt very close to when they should have gone. So the lifter was there, and then the lifter was gone. So me and 3 others were very, very short on time coming out to lift. And I think I was running up the platform, and I heard Joe Capolino yell at me to ditch the effing wrist wraps from the crowd. So I wrapped one of my wrists, looked at the clock, ditched the wrist wraps, ran out. I think I got onto the bar at 6 seconds left to get the squat command, and just like barely made it under the gun. And again, that's that same kind of like, holy crap, that just happened. But we made it, and that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
I can to some degree I can relate to this, because I know for me, having been lifting for a long time now, that that old adage of keeping the goal. Like I want to improve as long as I possibly can, to getting bigger and stronger. Those are kind of my overall goals. And some people might look at what I'm doing as like, oh, what is he, this ADD? Like, why can't he just stick to something? Why is this guy doing like strongman, Olympic weightlifting, and bodybuilding? And it's like, for me, these are other ways to lift to stay motivated, to, again, like you said, Bryce, to extend the runway, for me to see other ways to achieve mastery. And, I have so many different elements from the iron game that provide motivation to me. One of them is definitely progress. I do love the process, and I'll be lifting even when I'm getting weaker, when I'm like 70 to 80 to 90. Hopefully I make it that long. But I think like the fact that right now, every time I train the Olympic lifts, my snatch and my clean and jerk get better is just so satisfying on a level that I didn't experience in powerlifting for, I'm past that point in powerlifting, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
However, if I was to get involved in equip lifting, that would usher in that new era of that. And I think for someone who is looking for a way to go the long haul and to really keep themselves involved in the sport, I think you have to get creative. I think you have to find ways of working with your own personality to keep enjoying it, so that you keep making progress. Or you might find yourself retiring earlier than you might have otherwise, or just not enjoying it or having the same meaning. So I see you guys nodding, because obviously I've never done any equip lifting. I've done raw with wraps, but I have a feeling like when you guys talk that I relate to it in that way. Is that a big piece of it?
Definitely.
Yeah. And Eric, if you want to get back to that place with powerlifting, just go up a weight class.
I tried that. I actually talked to Mike about this.
Don't do it. Go up another one.
I went up to, I worked my way up to 100 kilos. And because, I watched a few people named Bryce do quite well going up a weight class. My bench went up, and I think that was largely attributed to my butt getting so big that it became a huge decline. But unfortunately, I think, like, if you look at my frame and what body weight I get down to and actually compete in bodybuilding, you can tell, even though I'm 6 foot, man, it doesn't really make sense for me to be 105, which is...
I think you need to be a 120.
A 120. That's the problem. I didn't go up enough.
Yeah. You gotta really commit.
Look, you're talking to equipped lifters, and this is a very equipped solution to the problem. Like,
I love it.
like it's kind of funny to me in a way, and I'm just semi-serious, I guess. But like, if you look at raw powerlifting and the most populous weight classes and stuff, it's middleweights. But at least my perception of it is, when powerlifting was more about equipped, it seemed like everybody was heavier, and if they weren't heavier yet, they planned on getting there.
They mapped their course from 83 to 120.
Yeah.
Right?
That's my journey right there.
So there was a certain, and Omar, I'll let you chime in as soon as I share this anecdote. So I've been doing seminars now for a decade, which is pretty cool. And the very first seminar I did, to make double digits, my mom had to attend, and we took a picture with her with a 3D Muscle Journey shirt on. So this is where we started, And we did them in Portola at Brad Loomis's gym, and he had to invite his clients who knew nothing about bodybuilding, and nor should they. They were just, people living in the same town, to get a decent number of people to where we kind of initially cut our chops. But sometime around, I'd say 2011, all the way to maybe 2013, 2014, there was a period where we were doing seminars, and we had pretty good attendance, and we were dealing with high-level lifters in multi-sport backgrounds of the iron game. And I was fixing the same problems all the time. And when it came to helping powerlifters, it was getting them to not tuck so much on their bench press. It was getting them to not focus so much on tricep and lat development. It was getting them to not sit back, to not do box squats, to not do all these things that came from that world, and to also tell them realistically, I don't think you need to go up another weight class. You might actually want to consider changing your diet from pizza to anything else besides pizza. And I distinctly remember there's a YouTube video from a prominent coach from the California area, and I won't say any names, but I don't even know if this person's around anymore. But he said, my general advice for nutrition for powerlifters is that pretty much everyone needs to go up a weight class, maybe 2. And I was thinking, I saw that, and I was like, how can that be your general advice? Like that's just applied to everybody. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't know what your background is, where you came from. You might currently have diabetes, but you need to go up 1, maybe 2 weight classes. And that was my perspective as well. I can't tell you how many failed bulks I had. And it's funny, the idea that I went up from 90 to 100, didn't get much stronger, but it's just on the other side of the corner. Like, if I just got to 105 and then 120, that's when I'd have this asymmetric growth and strength. And I think I think that's kind of that cultural belief, like more is more, more is better. That is definitely ingrained in kind of the older school, I'd say bodybuilding and powerlifting world. That's kind of something they definitely share. And I love it. Like there's a part of me that always thinks that, like, just got to go hard, go big, get it, you know?
Bigger body, bigger total.
That's what's up.
Now-
Lower Wilkes.
Whatever.
Omar, what were you going to say?
The alternative hypothesis I would say for that, Mike, actually would be, and I want to ask everyone here about the concept, no joke, of squishiness as it relates to geared lifting. So here's what I heard from Vlad, and then actually another Slavic home slice, Andrei Milanichev, who dabbled in it a little bit, who's coming to Toronto for a seminar in February. We just spoke a little bit. I was speaking to him because he was wearing wraps and he spoke about multiply and whatnot. And from what I could gather via the translation and kind of the English, what Vlad in particular said, and when you said, Mike, that, you know, it's a very equipped solution to go up a weight class, I have heard that the squishier, that's kind of the operative word here, that you are, the easier it is, or the more advantage. I don't know if this applies to single ply, which is why I'm opening up the floor here. But in multiply, for some reason, the extra weight assists. So let's say if you're a lean 13% body fat, because he was talking about me in particular when I was lifting. He's like, you need to like gain weight. And I'm like muscle is like everything. Like it wasn't just he meant like get fat, like just accumulate more
Be
total
bigger.
body weight. And so part of what he was saying too, he said with the equipment multiply, that the squishier you are, that almost acts, for those that do raw lifting, maybe like a belt, where, you know, when you're real lean and you get down there and you put on a belt and you just don't have as much to brace against when you're trying to get that bracing. It kind of feels like you're bracing against the wall. Whereas when I'm, 15 pounds heavier, a belt just feels better. And so he was using that analogy. And I just wonder for everyone out there that actually does equip lifting, single ply, if that holds true, that kind of as you graduate up in weight classes, in an absolute sense, the weight lifted is going up, but also maybe even a relative sense, that there is some sort of benefit just being heavier.
I think the squishiness factor is real.
Yeah.
I think that
would say the operative word.
actually is something that provides an advantage in equipment. There are lifters like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Charles Okpoko. He's a 74, I think he's 70, he's 74, lean, like super lean. And he has to wear loose gear because because he's so lean, there's no squish for the suit to compress. So it basically is just like, he's like doing blood flow restriction all the time if he wears like a really tight piece of equipment. And so if you have some fat on you, you can wear tighter gear for sure. Now, is tighter always better? Not necessarily, but I think so. I think it's a thing.
Yeah, I think it is as well. It's an idea that I've kind of played around with, and I mean, I don't know how you would seriously investigate it, but it's interesting, right? Like if you look at powerlifters in the pre-equipment era, they tended to be more muscular, a little bit leaner. And then especially in the height of the multiply equipment era, the people that you see on the cover of Powerlifting USA at the time or anything like that don't even look necessarily like they lift weights. They're carrying a lot of extra body fat, especially super heavyweight lifters. But then as raw becomes more popular, you're seeing the physiques change again. So it does kind of make me think that maybe there's something to it.
Mm-hmm.
My brother Vlad saying squishiness. I just love how he came up with that word, like to the technical word for him to describe it, and the way he could it's like squishiness is what he came up with.
That's exactly how I've described it in the past.
Yeah.
Was that same word? Same word.
Amazing.
I think if you think about the necessities of equipped lifting, it's that, okay, so you have this super tight suit on and you need to deform this material or it needs to deform you. And if there's more maybe elastic type tissue, like for it to kind of sink into, then I definitely think, like there's some potential benefit there. So I would agree with the squishiness being a thing.
That's probably an optimal range somewhere in there as well.
Yeah.
But,
I think so. Yeah.
The scientist in me thinks we could look at Wilks or IPF points relative to body weight absolute amounts in raw versus geared, and then plot that against the weight class, and you could see if there's a disproportionate advantage in your Wilks score as you go up in weight class, because obviously, or IPF points, because obviously there's a point in the super heavyweights where they're doing better because they're in a weight class that's unrestricted, but their IPF points or Wilks score is going down. And I wonder if that would happen at a later point among equipped lifters. That would be one way to figure that out.
It sounds like a pretty easy paper to kill for you.
Yeah.
I won't see anyone for the next 2 months as I
Just
dive
use
into the
use the dots system though.
Yeah.
The dots method of scoring, I would say.
There you go.
I think also I would wonder if you could say the threshold for like the IPF points or whatever relative scoring is X, and we're going to measure body fat of everyone who's achieving over this IPF score, and then compare raw lifters versus equipped lifters.
That would be interesting.
There you go.
And it's a tough one because there's so much more participation in raw lifting these days.
Right.
But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. One thing I had I wouldn't say a debate, but Greg and I were talking about. Greg Knuckles was of the belief that as we saw more and more people get into powerlifting, we would see leaner and leaner people, quote unquote, filling out their weight classes. And the data isn't quite there yet to support that. Like when you look at papers, there's a pretty broad range of people within a weight class who are at a high level with different body fat percentages. Like you might have, a good example is, Bryce Lewis versus Weirbecky. Weirbecky is taller, leaner, looks more like a bodybuilder who's in shape. Bryce has a ton of muscle, but he's shorter and he has more body fat at the same height. And they're both, world champions, right? And I'm wondering if, like, when you look at weightlifting, once you're below the unrestricted weight classes, you tend to see pretty lean people. And Greg was like, that's just because there's more people doing weightlifting. And I was like, I don't know. It might also be differences in the requirements of the lifts, or in this case, actually equipped versus unequipped. So it's intriguing because, like, technically, and I know this because I have a PhD, adipose tissue doesn't contract. There's not actually contractile tissue in fat, but there does seem to be something going on. Like, you definitely don't just get, sometimes you do get large increases in strength from going up weight class that don't seem to be related to just gaining muscle.
Because your leverages are changing, right? So you adding fat to your stomach area, your calves, like all of that, and that's giving you more bounce. I think it just is. I think it's like even more so in equipment.
Yeah. Well, I think as the classic composer Zapp said, there's more bounce to the ounce.
More cushion for the push-in is the even more technical. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. It depends
So all
on
I'm
which
hearing
era.
here is that Eric's going up to 120.
Yeah,
Correct.
I think so. I think that's what we
conclusion.
decided.
I'm switching to equip lifting as well, apparently. So.
Forget that strongman stuff you're doing in the weightlifting, Eric. You're pivoting neatly into 2020.
Don't
Put
worry.
a deadlift suit on for your next strongman competition, and then you're going to be in.
Yep.
Well, don't worry. The strongman voices are definitely like, "Oh, you're a 90 kilo competitor," and I'm like,
yeah, there's probably a lot of that.
They look at me and they go, "So you're in the 105s, right?" And I'm like, "No, I'm in the 90s." And then and then a friend of mine goes, "Yeah, but he's a very lean 90," and I'm like, "I don't need you to make excuses for me."
No. I just love in strongman competitions. I was just looking in Canada after we had that strongman episode with Alan Thrall and Joey Zatmary, and a lot of the competitions, so they do have weight classes, Eric, but a lot of the general ones, it's 275 and below and then 275 and above. That's just the cutoff. It's like, all right, those are the two classes. I'm like, are you kidding me?
See, this is what I'm talking about a little bit, though, like just the bias toward heavier weight classes. If you go back to when the WPO was bringing their major competitions to the Arnold, they called them super open weight classes, so lightweight, middleweight, heavyweight. And middleweight, I want to say, was 198, 220, and 242. If you were 242 pounds, you were middleweight,
Yes.
and that's because 275, 308, and heavyweight unlimited were the heavyweights. You had to be 275 pounds to be a heavyweight.
It is definitely a different perspective, a different era. I think, I would say from an inclusionary perspective, I do like that now strongman has more weight classes and that powerlifting is viewed a little differently. Because I think it's like, here's another parallel that I'll point out. There are actually a ton, and this is going to freak some people out, there's a ton of natural IFBB pros. Now I'm going to qualify those. They never compete in the IFBB pro ranks because these are people who get their pro cards at nationals in like the bantams and the very lightweight classes because they're like 5'4", you know? And there is a certain interesting thing that happens when people take anabolic steroids seriously. They just simply cannot be in the lower weight classes. They end up being, 198 pounds at 5'4". They go on to compete in the 212 or what used to be the 202 Olympia. So I actually I know a fair number of people who they're slightly tall for the weight class, but they're drug free and they got very high level in the NPC competing in the lightweight classes. And, they're really, really good bodybuilders, but it's just not something that was culturally rewarded or looked at in certain communities like enhanced bodybuilding or in the enhanced multiply powerlifting scene of ye old era. But now there's a place for a 5'2" lifter, or there's more female inclusion. There's just a ton more diversity in the lifting scene, which I think is really cool. There's a place for guys who are small boned and 6 foot, all right, and don't get stronger when they gain 10 kilos.
No one in particular we're talking about. Just
no one in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, they really fill out their genes from the back, and that could be seen as a positive, right. But that's about it.
Hey, speaking of small niches, I think we have to open up the floor now to the "It's Still Real to Me, Damn It" segment of the podcast, where I want to talk. I think Natalie, Bryce, you guys did an excellent job talking as equipped lifters, kind of why you do it, and maybe some of those misconceptions. Can we talk a little bit more about that? So to the outside world, when you try and share your story and what you do, and for some reason, it is kind of hilarious, I find it, that you'll have raw lifters that will kind of balk when they hear about equipped lifting, or it's like, oh wait, what are you doing? It's like, really, it's that different. Like, what are, to outsiders, what are some of those misconceptions out there about equipped lifting?
That all you need to do is put the suit on and you'll get 50 kilos on your squat or 50 kilos on your bench. That's a pretty common misconception. Like, someone looks at their raw total and then they're like, oh, if I put equipment on, I could total X. Like, actually not really.
I think I had a few comments on a couple of different videos to the tune of like, why don't you just get a forklift? It's like,
because it's not as strong as me.
You should take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Like,
especially as an equipped sumo deadlifter, there's just a lot. I got a big target painted right here on the internet, but it's one of those things where it's like, I think the misconception is that the suit essentially lifts for you, or will instantly increase your strength. But I think it's more a matter of the equipment facilitating the lifting. So yes, it gives you the capability to lift, to squat 100 kilos more, but you're not going to until you've done this for 4 or 5 or 6 or more years. It's a lot more involved. And I would challenge anybody who has that kind of a mindset about it to just try it. Just, see if you can get into somebody's bench shirt sometime and just get that experience. And it's, you may like it, you may not, and you may never do it again. But I think it's worth gaining that perspective before taking such like a hardline stance on things like that.
Yeah. I think the question that I get most often from just kind of like people somewhat outside of the circle of equipped powerlifting is, how much do you think I could X in a gear? And my like gut response is like, well, what's your best raw? I'm like, 200 kilos. Okay, like 180 to 210. The first time you put it on, and from there you can get better, but it's not just this easy math problem, and some people are better than others, and I think that's something that people really don't understand.
I just want to say I had the privilege of lifting with this hunk of a man known as Bryce, and he's the real deal. We're on a whim. What was it, Bryce? I asked you to work up. Was it 765 on the deadlift?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, just raw. Okay, no equipment. I'm like, hey man, I need this for a video, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna do it. I think what is amazing is sometimes individuals will want to belittle certain accomplishments, so they see something they don't understand. That's kind of ignorance in general, and that's why I think it's very important what you guys are doing, Bryce, Natalie, when it comes to equipped lifting, kind of shedding some light. The Calgary Barbell channel as a whole, I think you've done a fantastic job of just producing video content and making people interested. And maybe that's the pivot I want to be aware, Natalie, of your time. The pivot I want to ask you guys is, so we here at the Cult are indeed a cult, and we like to welcome new people. We've heard what you've spoken about. We've sipped the Kool-Aid. We're ready for individuals now that have listened to this, and they do, like you said, Bryce, they want to give it a go. How do you get it organized? Is there some sort of equipped lifting community online so you can find a local gym? Like, for someone that is now convinced, based on what everyone has spoken about, that, yeah, you know what, maybe I want to try this. What are the realistic next steps for people listening?
Yeah, I want to know how do I get into being a 120 equipped lifter? I know pizza's part of that.
I can give you some pretty quick tips on the 120 thing.
Why do you think Bryce has a barbecue?
I'll send you a DM. Yeah. First step is get a barbecue in your office.
Well, so I think, and this is I think that because we're seeing at least in the US, the raw qualifying totals are just like through the roof now, the raw nationals qualifying total. So people are kind of like, okay, well, how the hell am I going to accomplish this? Like, how am I going to still get to nationals? And I truly do think, like, for many folks, this is a great opportunity to try equipped lifting and go to open nationals instead of raw nationals. If you're 100 kilos off the qualifying total now, or even 50, like even 50 kilos off of it, like, this is a great chance to take up some equipped lifting. But it's not that easy to you don't just like hire a coach who can program for equipped lifters and then just like start from there. I think what I always tell people is get hand-me-down gear from somebody. So that's its own entire like step. But find somebody who's roughly your size, maybe a little bigger. Get some gear that sort of works. So a squat suit that's probably, a size or two too big, 2 or 3 sizes too big. A bench shirt. So things that you can easily get on without stressing yourself out, without having to go to like extreme lengths to get into it, where you can still perform the lifts using your normal technique. Just kind of like get the sensation of supportive equipment first. And then, and this is like one, assuming that you've found the equipment hand-me-down from somebody, and that you have a gym where you have like somewhat proficient training partners. And from there, don't interrupt your your existing training for this experiment. So I always tell people, like, well, do your raw workout, like your entire training session, and then put the squat suit on at the end and just mess with it for a few sets. You don't have to go to your max, like your equipped max or anything. Like, just experience what it feels like. Learn what depth feels like. Same with the bench shirt and the deadlift suit for I would say 6 weeks, like for a while, like just, and then you get a better idea of where you're at size wise, what you're going to need. And from there, then you can like make actual financial investments into equipped powerlifting. But I strongly believe in taking a good amount of time to just feel it out, because nobody has business ordering custom suits right off the bat, spending full price on them when you have no idea you have no idea what you're doing. So I think iron out those wrinkles first, and not even really, like, you don't even really need to have structure to it. Just, try to get a little bit better every week.
Awesome. That's really
be objective. That's always kind of my 2 cents into how to start. And then from there you can like start talking to coaches or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a USAPL like buy and sell page on Facebook somewhere. And I've seen a lot of people trading and getting used pieces of gear kind of around North America anyways. So I think that might be a decent place to be. If anybody is listening to this and is interested in Calgary, please send me a message. Come to our gym. We like every Saturday, somebody's in something. Often people are trying out shirts or wraps or whatever for the first time. We'd be more than happy to help you try to find a piece of equipment and get into it and try it out. As well, just finding a gym like where Natalie trains, or I think there's probably some equipped lifters where you are, Omar. I'm not sure about the rest of you guys. I know Mike trains mostly in his garage. So
go to Mike's garage.
Yeah, if you can, go to Mike's garage. It's awesome. But yeah, I think the big thing is try to get around people who have a little bit of an idea first and foremost, and try to get like thrown into it a little bit. And yet, like, just to echo Natalie a little bit more, definitely spend some time trying these things out before you invest, because there is definitely a sort of financial barrier to entry, and you might not like it. Like some people, like it's not for everybody, and that's totally okay. I think that's an okay thing about equipped lifting. But I've had people, get into it and be like, "Wow, I thought this was going to be like a slingshot, and it's not. I hate it. It hurts. Why do you do this?" I'm never doing that again. I've had a lot more of the opposite experience, but those, it's not absolutely for everybody. So definitely just try it out. Find a way to try it out. Be resourceful and find a way to try it.
And ask questions. One thing that I think equipped lifting has, that's maybe this is just the circles that I'm in, but a downside to a lot of equipped lifters or old time equipped lifters is that they almost want to basically break someone in their first time. So there was this, so we did a USA Powerlifting Olympic Training Center training camp, and there was a bunch of athletes that came in. It was really mostly new athletes, and there's a girl there that was a little bit taller than me, but about my size, and they had asked me to bring like an entire tote of my old equipment with, so that people who were interested could try. So I brought suits, and actually a squat suit fit her, and so she was just kind of like, I was doing kind of what I described earlier, just feeling it out. We started really light, and she just kind of worked up, and all of a sudden a couple of these older time coaches got really excited and then started having like almost a wrap off. And this poor girl was like just trying to experience equipped powerlifting, and the coaches are just like trying to destroy her. And she
see who could wrap her tighter.
She ended on a horrible note because somebody wrapped her way too hard. She could barely breathe. Like she was, panicking. She got under the bar and like just completely missed it and not for strength. It was because she was like, I'm in so much pain, I can't do this. So I think recognizing when, like the limits of that. And so that's probably more a message for equipped lifters who are in educating and teaching a new lifter who's interested, like, don't be an asshole. I've seen it so many times in my few years that it just like grinds my gears. Like I would rather be a really soft, like here's a very, very like simple, easy introduction. I want them to like it. But unfortunately, I was also introduced to it in that same way, where Priscilla wrapped my knees until I was black and blue, literally for days. Like my knees were black and blue, and they loaded over 400 pounds. At the time, my squat was like 325, and they were just like, all right, squat it. And I was just like, I just was like, I can't believe this is a thing people do. But I somehow decided I liked it. It's just, I think pretty common approach is like this. We're going to break you to see if you can hang.
Definitely. I think that goes back to the hipster masochist moniker that I used before.
Mike, you're going to say?
I was just going to say that I think what you guys highlight is a very responsible and level-headed approach to getting someone into equipment, and I wouldn't disagree with it at all. But just like so many things, I had a very opposite experience where I grew up in an area that had no other powerlifters, much less equipped powerlifters. And I read about equipped lifting in a magazine. There weren't any, even videos. Back in my day, there weren't even videos to watch. But I remember ordering a bench shirt and like trying to figure out how to get it on. Couldn't get it over my forearms. And just being like, I remember my dad is helping me trying to get this thing on. I was probably 16, 17 years old. And he's like, I think it's too small. And I was like, no, it's supposed to be tight. Just, keep trying to get this thing on. And we eventually did. And just messing with it, and trying to figure things out. And another quick anecdote telling on myself a little bit. Some years later, I was trying to get into this squat suit. It was a new, supposedly amazing squat suit. And I was maybe 18, 19 years old at the time, again, by myself, around no other equipped lifters. And I take this thing to the gym and I'm trying to get depth, and I don't know, I was maybe a 600-pound squatter at the time, unequipped. And I'm adding weight, and I'm only getting about halfway down. I got up to around 850 pounds and still only getting about halfway down. And the guys spotting me, were just like regular gym people. And like we had kind of run out of room on the bar at that point. And so we kind of hung it up. And I'm back in my room later thinking about this. I'm like, man, this thing, it's basically a spring, right? And the more you push it down, the harder it pushes back up. And I only got about halfway down with like 850. I bet I'm going to squat 1,000 pounds at the meet. But then 18-year-old Mike takes it a step further and thinks, I wonder if they'll have 1,000 pounds at the meet. I better email the meet director and make sure that he knows. So I sent him an email that was like, hey, I'm going to squat 1,000 pounds at your meet. I just want to make sure that you've got enough plates. And the next weekend, I drove the extra distance to go lift with Dan Goudreau, who knows something about equipped lifting, and he's watching me do warm-ups, and like I was not even to 600 pounds yet, and he just looks at it and goes, hey, loosen your belt a notch. And I got stapled with like not even 150 pounds less than what I had done the week prior to that. It's like a small tweak. You can actually get to depth and you find out, wait a minute, this isn't quite as simple. It's not what I thought it was. It's not just, oh, more weight pushed down harder, Mike, stand up. There's more to it than that. But I mean, I guess all that is just to say that I did self-teach all of it. So if you're just like, hey, this seems really cool, but I'm not around anybody, I mean, there's more distance to run there, but I think you can figure it out if you want to try hard enough.
Mike's actually got some really good solo bench shirt videos.
Yeah.
If you deep dive the RTS channel about like how to roll it and get it down on yourself, how to put it on, how to take the shirt off by yourself, which I think I still haven't been able to do it the way you do in that video with like the J cup trying to wiggle it. But yeah.
Since I'm in story mode here. So I was training by myself. I knew I was training by myself in my garage. That was just my training setup. I was competing equipped. I want to train equipped, but I don't have consistent training partners. So I've got to figure this shirt thing out. Like, how am I going to get the bench shirt on by myself? And somebody sent me a video of a Japanese lifter doing that technique that I show in that video, where you roll the shirt this certain way, you wiggle into it and zip, voila, you put the shirt on. And I got so excited. I was like, I got to see if this works. So I go to my closet and I get the shirt out, I roll it up, and I put the thing on and wiggle into it, zip, and there it's on. And I go, awesome, I can do this now. Now, how do I get it off? I was home by myself, and I was sitting at the dining room table in my bench shirt for about 45 minutes waiting for my wife to get home from work. And she gets home, and I was like, can you help me, please? So figuring out the back end to the equipped story is important as well. So make sure you've got an exit strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, no pun intended, it's good to have a supportive community, or at least a wife if you're going to be using supportive gear. But it's not impossible to do even if you are riding solo. So it's good to hear that there are both online resources to teach yourself, or to find the right equipment, or to at least maybe set up a meeting with a group of people who train at a given gym. I think that kind of parallels some of the Strawman episode we had, how in some of these more niche iron game expressions, it's really good to find a community so you can kind of ease that learning transition, and hopefully they're nice, like Natalie was mentioning. You'll be getting a DM from me because I'm too scared of other people. If I ever get into equip lifting, you'll be my go-to. I like your style. I need gentle hands. So yeah.
I would say probably now being aware of the time. We've been chatting for a while, and we could just continue going on. And I have a distinct feeling that we're going to have a three-peat of a certain individual, not naming names. But I think
Natalie.
now that, right? I thought I heard a voice. Maybe I didn't. So we have 5 minutes. With that time, I would say any closing remarks from anyone before we ask where can people find you. So anyone, this is once again just opening the floor to anyone here.
I would say, again, just try it.
Mm-hmm.
Before you make up your mind about whether you think it's cheating or whether you think it's cool or not, or whether it's for you, just try it. Find a way and try it. I don't know. I'm a big fan of this resurgence of interest in equipped lifting. I've been kind of jokingly calling it the equipped renaissance, and I'm hoping to be kind of a part of that whole movement. So DM me. I don't know. If you have questions, reach out. Come to Calgary. Just try it.
Pretty soon there's going to be a plane full of people coming to Calgary.
I would be so very happy with that.
Yeah, I think that just keeping an open mind about it, like I said, it was always posed to me as like, this is how it goes. You get strong raw, you put on gear. This is like the natural progression. But at the same time, I wasn't necessarily bought into that from the beginning. I was just kind of like, well, I'm doing pretty well, and I think it's fun. And I was climbing the ranks in the raw category, and but I kept my mind open and tried it and really loved it. And I think that getting over that, like the first couple of sessions are fun, but not fun in the way that you normally think of fun. So getting over that kind of initial hump of like, this is kind of stressful, I feel like I'm panicking, that's normal. And it'll all kind of get a little bit smoother from there, a little bit. There's always some of that.
Growing pains. Mike.
I would just kind of highlight what Eric was saying earlier about looking for ways to stay interested in iron sports. And, if you feel like, you're in this situation where you've been grinding on raw lifting for a while, and, it would just kind of be fun to have maybe just a slightly different challenge. It's a good way to stay engaged. Like Natalie said earlier, and Bryce too, that most of your training is still done raw. You're still going to get stronger raw. It just is different. It's a different layer. It's a different thing that can help keep it interesting. So yeah, just try it, right?
I think I should also mention USA Powerlifting is sanctioning some equipped seminars, like intro to equipped powerlifting seminars that I think they just recently ordered a huge order from Titan so that they have like a bunch of stuff on hand at the seminars. But for those who are in the United States, keep an eye out for that announcement, or I don't know anything about a schedule, but that'll be happening.
Very cool. That's awesome to do.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. So let's. I just want to say I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for coming on. This has been a really cool discussion, eye-opening for me as someone who's never done equip lifting or even coached equip lifters. So if folks want to find more about you, more about your coaching, and more about equip lifting in general, where can they find you? We're going to start on this part of my screen. Bryce, let us know.
So I am on Instagram as Bryce_CBB or Calgary Barbell, and I'm Calgary Barbell pretty much everywhere you would look. We do have a lot of YouTube content available, some of it specifically about equipped lifting. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check us out on YouTube, Calgary Barbell.
Awesome. Thank you. Mike?
Reactive training systems, pretty much anywhere you look, YouTube, Instagram, also Mike Tushir on Instagram.
And then Natalie.
Instagram, natalie.907. My coaching company is Corvus Strength Co. We're on Instagram. I don't really use YouTube, so that's your best bet is Instagram.
Awesome. Omar, you are the closeout king. I'm going to leave it to you. And thank you again, everyone, for coming on.
I just want to echo that and thank everyone. I'm still going to boycott powerlifting as a whole until the bicep curl is reinstated, but it's nice to hear alternative perspectives that are very informative. I think this will be illuminating for individuals that know nothing about equipped lifting. We're going to link everyone's information in the description. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, go ahead, leave a rating and review on iTunes. We're on YouTube. You can leave a comment. We'll do our best to respond. You can also like it. If you didn't like it, I mean, you can also do that. I would recommend staying just as far away from that button as possible. And we'll see everyone in that next episode every single Monday.